Good evening. Welcome to a special meeting of the board, Monday, December 8th. I will introduce Dr. Wagner Marseille, who's going to provide a presentation on bus parking. Also, if you have not signed up already for public comment, if you could please do that with Ms. LaPera so that we know who wants to speak.
Yeah. Thank you. Just want to make sure we had all of our technology set aside. Good evening. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about and to welcome everyone tonight to tonight's meeting as we continue the dialogue on enrollment and bus parking. Before I get started, a colleague of mine shared a quote with me that I think speaks to the ongoing dialogue, which has generated so many different perspectives and views. And General Patton said that if everyone is thinking alike, then somebody isn't thinking. And I think it goes to show the amount of diverse conversations, opinions, and recommendations that we have heard and that we're attentive to, which speaks to the number of meetings that are taking place. So I do want to welcome everyone tonight meeting and understand that these conversations, these set of options, these outcomes really are not just a district issue. It's really a community issue, and we're one and the same. So I think that continue to believe, and it's demonstrated that when Lower Merion in its entirety gets together, there's really not anything that we can't do. So we welcome you to tonight's conversation. And I want to talk a little bit about and move through a series of dates that we have presented and where we are tonight in terms of further dialogue and discourse based on conversations we've heard from the 17th and the 24th. And then a little bit about December 15th with regards to board vote or action items. And I'll be speaking a little bit more about what that means around that December 15th in later slides. So again, I think many of you have seen this in terms of presentations, again wanting to, I guess, bring some light to or remind individuals the conversations that have taken place since July. I know that this has been an ongoing conversation before July, but want to get a sense of where we've been for this time frame and talk a little bit about where we're going in the next subsequent slides. And most recently, there was a community meeting regarding Matson Ford Road that I think my colleague Pat Gannon will talk a little bit more about in terms of new information. So, what we want to highlight for you today in this short presentation. And I have a couple of slides, and I said earlier that Pat Gannon will be here and walk through the remaining slides, is really try to identify some of the highlights that came from our November 24th meeting. And to say that we had a large number of community members who spoke and had a myriad of questions and concerns. And though we're not able to, at least for this meeting, and we're going to address some of that on our website, and we've been doing that. Want to touch up briefly on some of the major areas that I heard repeatedly in terms of conversation and concern. So we'll touch up on those, and then we want to talk a little bit about information that the administrative team has gathered since the 24th. I think it's new information. The conversation is continuing to get as much information as possible to help us make a more informed decision. And then we'll talk briefly about where we are with next steps. So out of all of the comments that we took on the 24th, and I said earlier that can't go through all of them tonight, there were three that continue to be a theme in majority of the statements from residents. And it was the idea about haste, the need to slow down, and are you rushing the decision? And then there was conversation that repeated itself over and over again in statements around congestion relating to safety at Lower Merion High School based on the options that we presented that we're looking at. And then there continued to be a conversation around the CAC report, this promise around 2 high schools of equal size. And I'm not sure if individuals will be happy with my response or my comment, but I did want to at least acknowledge and speak briefly to some of those, since those were some of the themes that came across the conversation. So really, to bring this into really one slide in terms of what some of the responses were. On December 15th, we initially talked about that we wanted a board vote, and there was conversations with why then, why now. It seems pretty washed. There was concern about the holidays, concern about was there ample enough opportunity for the public to voice their concerns and comments. And what I wanted to clarify with the 15th is that what we want to do as an administration and the board is we want to get as much information and additional information as possible. So on the 15th, what I plan to do is I plan to ask the board to authorize additional analysis, because I think there are a lot of questions that remain unanswered that we want to get a much better sense of these particular options. And in order to do that, I think we need to either bring in existing or our existing consultants and ask for further analysis, or any new consultants to help us think more critically about the options that we're moving forward. So December 15th is not an opportunity to say we're going to vote on a option. Administration is not ready to move in that direction. Administration, however, in light of new information, does want permission to move forward and get more information about some of the options. We also talked about safety. Already too much congestion at Lower Merion High School. And on December 19th, my administrative team has a meeting with Lower Merion Township Police to echo some of the sentiments that we heard around some of the options and the impact that it might have on congestion. And I know that one of the civic associations, Wynwood, has actively engaged and requested the township to think more critically about the traffic at Lower Merion and Montgomery, and we hope to be part of the ongoing dialogue because I think that regardless of which options that we'd like to further explore and get more information on, I think either or, I think the conversation still needs to have around safety, and there's merit to that. So we are looking forward to that conversation as well. And then there were conversations around the 2004 CAC report. Continued dialogue on in December, when 45 members of the community were selected to review a myriad of options with regards to enrollment, equal high schools, and want to say that after going over and over the report and trying to get a sense of where the community was at that time, where the CAC committee thought about, and they walked through this process. And I bring this up because I wanted to make sure that I fully understood or gained some more clarity on that report since it was coming up. And, you know, at the time, to the CAC's credit in terms of trying to figure out how to address the current issues at the time, and that is, one, fully renovate both schools, think about a separate 9th grade school and a 10th grade school. There was conversation about a single high school. There were options with regards to 2 new unequal high schools, and then 2 new equal-sized high schools with approximately 1,250 students. And what you're seeing here is a graph that kind of represents, and I think this has been shown on previous board presentations, but it probably goes further back. But I wanted to bring your attention to what you're looking at. And what you're looking at it with the blue line is when the CAC met and was formed in December, began their work in January of 2004, and began to look at high school enrollment and projections. And that blue line dictates where those projections were moving towards. And then you see that actual burgundy line and starts to paint a picture of actually where we are as a district from 2003-04 all the way to 2014. And then more recently, that white line, if you're able to see that, I hope it's coming out for those in the audience, is the Dijon Haley projections in terms of student enrollment. So while I understand that the report spoke about 2 equal high schools, and I know that there was massive disparity in terms of number throughout beginning in 2003, moving forward, and looking at 2006, and where there was obviously a very large discrepancy between the number of students at Harriton High School and Lower Marion, which topped 1627. And though there is no arguing in terms of the numbers, in terms that yes, we're not 1,250 each in terms of the CAC report. But what I wanted to really talk about, because one of the things that came from that report that we're very proud of is the equity in terms of programming that we've been able to offer. And it's really not necessarily a consolation prize in terms of for not having the exact numbers. It is what it is in terms of 1170 and 1350. But I think when you look at programming at Harriton in 2008 and where it is now, or last year when we talked about this, and the numbers are even a little bit higher in terms of new course offerings that we're going to put into place for the following school year at both schools, is you see that we've come a long way in terms of programming, making sure that there is equity in terms of course offerings. We really wanted to make sure that there was equity around our athletic programs and PIAA and moving into that, and the number of teams that are offered. So yes, it was a vastly different experience many years ago, and could argue that there were experiences that were not afforded to Harriton students, and we've worked really hard, previous boards, this board and previous administration, to support that. The number of courses that were not available that's been added since 2008 to try to find parity in that conversation. And then what I wanted to, and then there was conversation around school choice, and that, to be very clear, that in between June, November of 2013, we've had this conversation with regards to expanding high school choice. And part of that conversation really was about several options. Do we build an addition at Harrington to mitigate increasing enrollment? Or do we utilize the current space in the DAO to renovate buildings, to renovate spaces here in this particular building? And the decision which we are currently living with is the fact that the current occupation of the DAO, in terms of retrofitting that to fit classes, was the most cost-effective option. When conversation was had with the administration in terms of how much would it cost to build an addition at Harrington versus the cost of retrofitting existing classrooms for the enrollment growth, we decided that that was the most cost-effective, and that I don't have any data to support that choice impacted the growth. The number of students coming into our district, I've continued to say repeatedly over and over again that Lower Merion School District continues to be the school of choice. And we're seeing that with the rise of students and parents who want that experience, or guardians who want that experience for their child. So I did really want to touch up on those particular statements from previous, from the 24th and from previous meetings. In addition, and I'm going to pass over to Pat Ganan, who's going to talk a little bit about where we are with regards to what we believe to be the timeline for some of these decisions, what we believe to be some of our needs for additional buses and how that looks, and then walk through what we've learned since the 24th in terms of some of the options that we presented to you. And we've learned a lot from that process, and we've learned that there's much more information that we need to gather in order to really come to an educated decision with regards to viable options for ongoing enrollment. So with that, Pat, can you walk us through the next 10 to 12 slides?
Good evening. I'm going to switch gears just a little bit here. This slide talks about how we've done our estimate of additional buses we would need. That is the buses we don't yet own, but those we anticipate having to acquire in order to handle the enrollment increases. We're using the data from our 2012 DeJong-Healy enrollment projection study. We're using the factors as shown there on the slide, and our conclusion is that we're going to end up needing anywhere from 12 to 14 buses. Previous slides may have said 12 to 15. That was incorrect. It's 12 to 14. This slide shows a number of pieces of information. It shows district enrollment over time, again from the DeJong-Healy study. It shows the parking surplus or deficit that's projected at Lower Merion High School. And again, that's based on enrollment projections, but also based on the traffic study that was conducted a year ago, traffic and parking study. The computations of the bus requirements are then shown, number of buses per year, and then how that adds up cumulatively. So this is a picture, a future picture of what may be happening in the district in terms of overall enrollment, in terms of bus acquisition, and then what's happening on the Lower Merion High School site with respect to parking. And obviously the parking deficit will be driven by growth in staff and students at the high school. These numbers assume that the number of people in the admin building and the number of people related to the 25 buses on site remains constant over that time. It also does not account for any particular time when we may need additional parking to accommodate construction, lay-down area for construction. These are options we've looked at previously. I just wanted to go over them again and remind folks that we have not found any one location that we think is going to solve our problem. So we're looking at combinations of locations. Many of our options revolve around using our property at Matson Ford Road. By building a parking structure for cars, we could expand the number of buses on site. So we have an option where we pair that with additional buses at Harriton. We have an option where we pair that with building a parking deck at Lower Merion High School. We have an option where we pair the Matson Ford Road deck with reducing or eliminating student parking at Lower Merion High School. And we have an option where we pair the Matson Ford Road deck with potential use of the Woodbine Avenue property. Then we have an option where we're looking at Riders Ferry Road in and of itself, because it would be large enough to solve the problem. So here's some additional information we've gathered since the last meeting. Much of it has come from analysis of our options from our newly engaged zoning attorney. First, let me start with Matson Ford Road. Again, I said that our concept here is to build a parking deck for cars, thereby freeing up space to add additional busing. So it would be an expansion of the existing use, and the zoning on site does support bus parking. However, it's become clear to us that this process is not going to be as straightforward as we had originally thought. We have had a meeting, community meeting with the township residents as well as nearby residents of West Conshohocken Borough and Upper Merion. We had that 2 days before Thanksgiving, and we learned formally that both those municipalities are going to oppose the expansion. They have a number of concerns that we're going to have to sit down and try to work out with them in order to alleviate their concerns. In addition, there may be some concerns on the Lower Merion Township side about adding buses and what routes those buses would take to and from the Matson Ford Road site. And of course, potential litigation could delay this option. This slide actually talks to two different options, which I outlined earlier. It's the combination of the Matson Ford Road deck and building a parking structure at Lower Merion High School, or a combination of the Matson Ford Road deck and eliminating student parking. So we believe at this point that a parking deck would require land development, but we need additional information to determine exactly whether it would meet the zoning requirements for bulk and area and setback, et cetera. And to verify what number of spaces would be required on the site. So therefore, we're going to need to have a little bit more of a design developed in order to be able to sit down with township staff and talk about those kind of issues. We've learned about concerns. We've heard these before, potential increase in traffic, problems with parking in the neighborhood, and again, potential litigation could delay our process. This slide says Harriton High School parking, but again, it's combined with the expansion of the Matson Ford Road deck. We have buses parked at Harriton right now, and we obtained that permission through the approval of the new high school. And the condition states that we are limited to parking 25 buses on the site. Therefore, in order to park any additional buses on site, whether we do it on existing pavement or we do it on additional pavement, which we may be able to add and stay within our impervious surface, we will have to get the approval of the commissioners. And indications from the township are right now that that approval would not be forthcoming. Another property we've been looking at in combination with Matson Ford Road is a property on North Woodbine Avenue. The main concern here is zoning. The property is zoned residential, even though the use on it today is considered non-conforming for residential. And the township staff has indicated to us that they do not consider a standalone bus parking facility to be an educational use and therefore permitted in a residential area. So again, we need a little bit more information about the site so that we could sit down and identify other zoning considerations that may be involved. But the biggest one we would have to take on is whether the use is actually permitted in that location. And lastly, Writers Ferry Road. This again is the property that is located along the Schuylkill River. It's at the base of Writers Ferry Road, the very bottom of the hill after the road comes down and goes underneath the interstate and the train tracks. Part of this property is already under development for apartments by the O'Neill Property Group. The property we're looking for does not have any development on it today. It's owned by Penn Realty. We could park all the buses we need to park down here. There's also a potential for adding playing fields, given how much space we may be able to acquire. We would need land development approval. We are going to have to verify some zoning considerations to ensure that we are in fact in the floodway fringe and not in the floodway. Being in the floodway fringe would allow us to get approval for our use either by special exception or by conditional use from the commissioners. However, there's some major concerns here. One is to verify that there's no environmental problems, but even more than that is the fact that the owner has not indicated a willingness to sell his property, and in fact has recently submitted a land development application for building apartments on the site. And this is a rendering that he submitted along with that application. This is an aerial view from Manayunk across the river. So you can see that it's fairly substantial proposed development. It's over 200 units. So that creates another potential obstacle to overcome with respect to that property. And now I'm going to talk about the option to relocate the administration to lease space within the township. We showed this slide at our last meeting. We've got a little bit more information here, but I wanted to just emphasize again that the cost range that we have there is from a local broker looking at Lower Merion Township properties. We are yet tracking down the additional costs that would be involved in making such a move. However, we're still looking at the 21,000 square feet rather, as our target amount. Obviously, as we pick a location and get serious about it, we'll try to be as efficient as possible. However, and this is something new from last time, there are student and parent confidentiality issues that are going to require that the space be configured a little bit differently than your standard office space. Some of the pros for relocating the administration, all these people would leave the site. So as the high school gradually expanded, those spaces would be filled in by additional staff and students. The buses would stay on site, therefore eliminates need for a parking deck and basically results in no net increase in traffic. Two of the cons on this option are pretty significant. One is the operational cost. The figure we show here, $500,000, $700,000 a year in lease costs, would be a significant addition to our operating budget. The other one is that we would end up with some space on site that's underutilized. And this is space that we, not too long ago, have spent a lot of money to renovate and done so with respect to the historic resource that the building is. This is an updated option that tries to capture some of the costs of these options. The Matson Ford Road deck plus the DAO relocation to lease space is listed first. So we've shown the estimated cost for the Matson Ford Road deck, then we've shown the annual lease cost for the relocation of admin, and then we've shown a figure of $280,000 that represents the temporary relocation of vehicles off Matson Ford Road in order that allows us to construct the parking deck on that site. And the $280,000 consists of lease for real estate to park vehicles, and then additional time that we anticipate that we would end up having to pay employees because they'd be on the clock longer every day. We've shown the Matson Ford Road deck plus Harriton High School and temporary parking. We show the Lower Merion High School deck. Again, the temporary parking related to Matson Ford Road. And we show the option with no student parking or reduced student parking at Lower Merion High School. There's really no cost for that. And then we show an estimated cost for using the property at Woodbine, acquiring and then developing the property at Woodbine. And the Writers Ferry Road property, we have no cost because at this point it's very difficult to determine what it would be. The next steps we propose are to continue to process and evaluate all the comments that we've received, including tonight. We'll continue our dialogue with members of the community, township staff, et cetera, and we'll continue to analyze the legal aspects of the various options that we're looking at. We are going to meet with the police. As the superintendent pointed out, we are in receipt of the recommendations made by the Wynwood Civic Association. We believe there's a lot of merit to some of those recommendations. We'd like to be part of that process, and we're going to start out by meeting with the police on the 19th. We will, as the superintendent said, next week come and make a recommendation to engage or to spend additional funds to seek more information about some of these alternatives. And then, of course, we'll share all of this on the district website. Are there any questions I could answer?
Thank you, Dr. Marseille and Mr. Gannan. I'd like to open up the floor for questions from board members first. Anyone have questions? I'll look to my left. Am I right?
Can I just
Oh,
make a
please.
point of clarification? If you go back to the discussion around the discussion of expanding choice, our actual meetings began discussing that in February of 2013. I just want to clarify that since there were,
Okay, I think the slide said June.
yes. So
Okay.
I just want to clarify that we did not start discussing that over the summer. That's all.
Thank you. Additional questions, Dr. O'Leary?
Hi, if we were to move the administration, would that change the construction needs at the DAO? You said they'd be
No,
on you.
I don't believe it would.
Okay.
The space we would be vacating is primarily configured as office space. So we could certainly take a look at what use it could be made, but the primary things we have to do in the building have to do with spaces that are already configured as classrooms. And I don't think you're going to find those kind of spaces in the two-story portion of the building. In addition to that, one of the needs we've identified is additional science labs. So those are going to have to be constructed no matter what.
Other questions?
I was, could you go through and clarify a little bit more the costs of each option for us and the audience? Just talk them through with a little more detail.
Okay, let me start at the top again. That option is a combination of Matson Ford Road deck plus relocating the administration to lease space. So the $3.5 to $4 million is the cost for the project at Matson Ford Road. The $280,000 is the temporary parking that's required to support that project. So that's a one-time cost. And the lease is the $500,000 to $700,000 per year. So we move down to the next option, Matson Ford Road deck. There's your $3.5 to $4 million plus your $280,000. And then the Harriton High School option is priced at $1.5 to $2 million. And that assumes we add additional pavement. The third option is Matson Ford Road plus the Lower Marion High School deck. So we have the $3.5 to $4 million for Matson Ford. We have $3 million for the Lower Marion High School parking deck, plus our $280,000 temporary parking. The next option shows just the cost of the Matson Ford Road deck with its temporary parking. There's no cost associated that we've identified with eliminating or reducing student parking. And then when you look at Matson Ford Road deck plus Woodbine, you see the $3.5 to $4 million for Matson Ford Road. You see the $280,000 for Matson Ford Road. The $2.5 million is our estimate for acquiring and developing the Woodbine Avenue property.
Thank you.
To follow the statement, I think in hindsight we could have put another column there and gave running totals for the audience in terms of without doing mental math. But if you look at the first two options, they appear to be the most costly options on that list, and I think out of all the options, even though we're not, we don't have exact numbers on Writers Ferry Road. But if we, with that aside, the least costly option would be the no student parking at Lower Marion High School, along with Matson Ford.
Thank
But
you,
we
Dr.
will-
Marseille. That was the
I'll
type
modify
of
that.
clarification.
I'll modify that slide and put some total numbers next presentation, and other information we might find with regards to cost.
Thank you. That, maybe, I don't know if I've heard this so many times, but it gets clearer every time. That was really clear and helpful. But just one thing you mentioned, but it's not in the cost column, but aren't there also sunk costs that we spent renovating this building? I mean, isn't that really a cost too if we're thinking about moving the administration out?
That's true, and I was alluding to that when I mentioned that one of the cons of that would be we would end up with space that's underutilized, space that we not too long ago spent money to renovate.
And then if we eliminated student parking, would we still need the deck?
The deck at Lower Marion or
Matson
the?
Ford.
Yes, we would.
Thank you.
Any additional questions? Dr. O'Leary?
I want to understand the expense of the temporary parking, and if that, I know some of these things go into operating costs and some of them are more capital expenditures. Can you talk a little bit more about the expense of temporary parking and the feasibility of actually finding temporary parking?
As I mentioned earlier, there's two components. One is to lease a space, and the other is which would clearly be an operating cost, is the additional time to pay drivers because we have to shuttle them back and forth. So this is based on the concept where if we can find a place close enough to the Matson Ford Road site, we won't move buses, we'll just have the drivers park at the off-site location. And then we'll use a bus to shuttle them back and forth. The idea being it may be a tad easier to find a spot to just park cars, especially cars that won't be there overnight or on weekends, than it would be to find a place to park the yellow things.
I did have a question which may be more appropriate for Mr. Roos. When we talk about school use, how does bus parking fit into that concept?
There's a matter of some disagreement on this point. At a minimum, school use means you can use property for a school building. The question as to whether and to what extent you can use bus parking or administrative offices or others. Certainly, anything that's needed for that school you could use, but as a standalone, that's where I think there's disagreement on whether and to what extent standalone bus parking constitutes a school use, at least under zoning codes.
Other questions? Okay, so we are going to move now to public comment. If you have not signed up with Ms. LaPera, I'd ask that you do that now, and I'd like to defer to our solicitor to provide the parameters for this evening's public comment.
Thank you. As similar to what was explained at the beginning of the meeting on November 24th, residents and taxpayers all can speak. Because of the impact to residents of Upper Marion and West Conshohocken close by to the Matson Ford Road site, if there are individuals from those municipalities who live near that Matson Ford Road site, they are also permitted to speak. And then additionally, the board received a request from the two civic associations for their attorney to speak on their behalf, and that request has been granted with the understanding that that individual will speak after residents and taxpayers have had the chance to speak.
So Denise, Ms. LaPera, would you call the first
I
speaker?
certainly will.
Thank you.
I'll just call the first couple. I have Ted Goldsboro, Ruth Jenkin, and Perry Hamilton.
Good evening. My name is Ted Goldsboro. I live in Ballackinwood. I thank you all for serving our community, and I thank the superintendent. And listening to your presentation tonight certainly presents very difficult challenges for you all. It doesn't seem like there are any easy solutions to these problems. If, with the renovation of the administration building, I presume that most of the students the population of Lower Merion High School would increase. So there'd be more students on this site. But as the projection with the white line, what's going to happen to Harrington in 5 or 10 years? Will they need additional buildings too, or will those students be transferred down here? I don't have the answer to that. Asking a question, my main concern is this site not get terribly crowded. I graduated from Lower Merion in 1957, and that was the year before Harrington opened. So we were really packed, and of course that made us tremendously powerful athletically and scholastically. But I know that Dr. McGill had proposed at one point having one school. And I'm aware that Harrington has more acreage than Lower Merion does, but the problems seem very difficult to solve, and I again thank you for serving on the school board.
Thank you for your question, sir. Next speaker.
Ruth Jenkins. Perry Hamilton and Dan Diaquila.
Ruth Jenkins, Wynwood. I'm grateful that the board has reconsidered the 15th and not taking a vote on a final decision. There is not that much of a hurry, and you're spending tremendous amounts of our money, and we need to have more thoughtfulness that goes with that. We need to invest more time in research. Number two, with regard to the quote from General Patton, I'm also interested to know the differences in your opinions, because from where we sit, I see only one opinion, and that makes me uneasy that there is no opposition on the board, nobody that really represents us. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Perry Hamilton. I live at 418 Penn Road, Wynwood. And, I appeared before this group on November 24th, and I pretty much said all that I had to say. At least that's what I thought. But right after I spoke, Denise Mitchie of the North Ardmore Civic Association spoke very passionately, a very well-articulated speech, and moved me to speak this evening. She gave me some further thought that I think you should take into account as well. I think we could all agree, and I think with Ted Goldsboro sitting right here, he could validate this. Lower Merion schools have always been the best schools in the country. When my dad was a teenager in the 1930s, Lower Merion schools were the finest in the country. During my growing years, Lower Merion schools were considered the best in the country. And then again, when my children were scholastic age, the Lower Merion schools, again, were the best in the country. Over the decades, the reputations of schools ebb and flow much like tides, but the reputation of the Lower Merion School District always ebbs and flows way up at the top. It's always the very top or very close to it. I would point out that I think a high watermark of the Lower Merion High School's reputation were during the years that I grew up in the 50s and 60s, when I lived about a block away from Arnold Field. Not only was Lower Merion High School nationally remarkable for its scholastic, its arts, and its performance in many of the marquee sports, in those days football and track, but our school taxes were among the lowest to be found anywhere. And the president of the school board was a local car salesman. He sold my parents a used Rambler in the 50s. But I think the most notable difference between then and now was articulated very well and very passionately by our neighbor from North Ardmore, Denise Mitchie, on November 24th. In my words, not hers, Lower Merion School District has not been a very good neighbor anywhere. Not only does a basic Lower Merion village go collectively berserk at the proposal of having some school buses housed in a commercially zoned district, but this school board is actually drawing significant protests from residents of Upper Merion who don't even have buses in their township. I do want to point out, growing up near Arnold Field, about a block away from it, our streets were frequently lined with cars all the way to Station and Aubrey Roads during events such as the Lower Merion Relays, the Ardmore Relays, and of course, several Saturday Lower Merion football games that regularly in those days drew thousands of fans. In fact, the Lower Merion Radnor game of 1956 drew more than 10,000 fans to Arnold Field, and the neighbors loved it. My parents and none of the other parents in the neighborhood ever complained. They never had to come to the school board the way that the neighbors do today. I do want to point out a little bit to the contrary. In my experience, it seems that your administrative officials, that is your high school principals, they are sensitive to the neighbors' concerns and needs. But I do think it would be very helpful if this school board would consider improving its relationship with its neighborhoods. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Before the, yeah, I'm sorry, before the next speaker goes, if you don't mind, I want to respond a little bit to a couple of the statements. I do want to say that I do agree that there are no easy solutions to this process, and what we've been trying to do is manage what I earlier indicated as the destination of choice for a myriad of reasons. And unfortunately, I've contributed to that because I have a 4-year-old daughter, and we just moved into the district, who will be attending Gladwin. So I'm sorry, I'm part of the enrollment growth. Someone wanting to have the Lower Merion experience, and I think that it's extremely important that we think many, many years ahead in terms of how we're going to appropriately address that. 5 years from now, where will Harrington look like? We've done some preliminary analysis in terms of enrollment projections, and Harrington, if the numbers continue to go in that direction, will probably be around 1,387, close to 1,400 students. And we've, previous administration have talked about that 1,400 number being the number where that might begin to start impacting curricular options. So we want to make sure that we stay ahead of that. And in addition, I have to say that I don't want to speak for the board, but I will speak my own personal opinion that I think everyone here on the board, there is no one opinion. In conversations, there is no one opinion. Everyone here has really thoughtful conversations around, well, if we make a decision, let's make sure it's the best decision. And that's why we continually have these particular dialogues, and we do want to be good neighbors, and we try to be good neighbors. Those were my comments, and please, sir.
Hello, Dan DeQuilla, Wynwood Civic Association. So I was also at the meeting on the 24th, so Dr. Mercier, thank you very much for summarizing the recurring themes. Very good job. It was excellent. Yes, do not rush the decision, a big important one, and I think that's what some of us were trying to get at the last meeting, relative to when we went to the school. We're coming here in front of you, we're talking about the option of expanding school choice. We didn't want to rush that decision either, because the numbers are important to be fiscally responsible. And I remember from my notes from the October of 2013 presentation, some of the differences were less than $2 million between an option at Harrington or a combination of Harrington and Lower Merion in that discussion. And here we're now talking about a garage that's $3 to $3.5 million, more than the differential. So that's just why we don't want to rush it. So thank you very much. You heard us, and it sounds like you're doing the right thing and engaging more consultants and seeing this through the proper way. And so we appreciate that. Already too much congestion at Lower Merion High School? Absolutely. That's our biggest concern, and that's why of the options that are on the table, the parking ban of students is going to add congestion to the neighborhood, and this is totally incongruous with what we were talking about earlier with the safety study and the traffic study with the Lower Merion Police Department. So we just do not see that being as a viable option. And then in addition, building a deck here at Lower Merion High School would also significantly add to the congestion in and around the campus, especially at the rush hours. And I guess my last comment is, we do know that there were some previous approvals for parking structures at both Harridan and at Welsh Valley that are 12, 15, 16 years old. And, so why haven't those been discussed as options? That was my last question.
Thank you. Next speaker.
B. Silk, Pam Porter, Sarah Slattery, Allison Graham.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for your comments and explaining what happened on the 24th, because I was not at the 24th. My name is Barbara Silk. I live in Marion, and I am not next to any of the parking places that are being considered, but I do pay taxes in the township, and it is a consideration for me. And I feel that the presentations really seem to center around the options that were available for all of these buses that are coming. But I regularly involved with the Board of Commissioners and the township officials, and I have heard them say numerous times in writing too, that they do not believe that these projected estimates for enrollment are in fact accurate or correct. So to spend a lot of time and a lot of money analyzing all of the bus sites, if in fact the enrollment projections are not correct, I'm just wondering how you address that. And I don't know who did the study, but it seems that everybody is totally relying on those studies in this group, but not relying on it at the township level. So that's sort of a question. There's a complete disconnect from what I hear from them and what I'm hearing tonight. So if somebody could address that. And there's one other thing. This was, again, going with that. I forget, one of the presenters said that the commissioner's approval was not forthcoming on many of these sites. And I think that the reason for that is that they don't believe that the projections are in fact correct. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I want to quickly comment, sorry. I don't know how the township is looking at this process. Let me explain briefly how we're looking at the process, and it's not a speculation. For the last 3 years, enrollment have gone up. We count the number of young bodies in our seats and in our buildings. And if you look at the growth at Gladwin, the new additions that we put in, if you take a look at the growth at Penn Valley and those additions in classrooms, if you take a look at Penn Wen as well, the growth that is occurring there. Matter of fact, that previous analysis that we did was totally off the charts, because it was the level of growth happening at Penn Wen was something that we kind of took a step back and said, okay, what is going wrong here? Because they're so vastly different than the projections. So we can argue methodology, and we can argue the way in which data was collected, the way it was analyzed moving forward. But let me tell you, the last 3 years, we have students in our classrooms. We had to build additions to accommodate those students in our classroom. And what concerns me is that we've just built new additions, and if indeed the projections go the way they're going, then I'm concerned that we have a major enrollment issue that we need to address.
Okay. Would you be able, well, I'm not sure if you'd be able to answer this question, so I'll answer this question. When we went in October I just pulled up the presentation from October, and if we had done nothing about expanding choice, the cost of an addition at Harriton plus the addition at the DAO building, in other words, would have been 10.4 million. And if we expanded choice and did the DAO building, the estimate was 5.2 million. So I'd just like to report that out since those are the accurate numbers.
Thank you, Dr. Marseille and Dr. Gilbert. Next speaker, thank you.
We have Pam Porter, Sarah Slattery, Allison Graham.
Great. Thank you. My name is Pam Porter, and I live on Ithan Avenue in Rosemont, just down the street from Harriton High School. I wanted to also commend all of you for your service. I know it's a lot of hard work, and it's not exactly a highly compensated role to be on the school board. So thank you for that many hours that you put in.
It's not compensated at all. I just want you to know that. There's no stipend. There's no. We get pencils and paper.
I get it.
We got
get
the
it.
Diet Coke.
And Diet Coke. Well, thank you. And in that spirit of citizenship, I want to also ask, as you're making these decisions, to reinforce the value of being a good neighbor. All of the locations in which Lower Merion schools are situated are in neighborhoods, and I think to be intentional about what is the impact that our school has on the neighbors. What does it do to the traffic? Are the roads around the school able to handle the additional congestion? Are there sidewalks for the safety of the people who live in those neighborhoods? What is the environmental impact? Are we concerned about the water runoff? Is there sensitivity in the land that may have many streams and underwater streams running through it? So that we're really sensitive to the impervious surface coverage and how it might not just be managed on the property, but how the runoff affects the neighbors surrounding the property. A second idea that I wanted to put forward is the idea of sharing the burden. I mean, clearly you've heard the emotion as people have heard that bus parking might be moved to their neighborhood. It's not something that anybody really wants. And so I would say the idea of sharing the burden among many neighborhoods, many schools at all the different properties is a concept to promote. And the third idea is to think innovatively. We live in a time of Uber and Airbnb, business models being constantly innovated, and have we thought about how we bus our students? Is there a way to provide the service without simply buying more buses? Is there a way to re-engineer and to innovate what we do? And so those are the three thoughts I would share with you today. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hi, my name's Sarah Slattery. I thank you tonight for taking another night of public comment. And I do not envy your position trying to make all these positions, all these little pieces in the jigsaw puzzle fit. But I still go back after hearing a lot of these meetings for many years and trying to figure out really what is the problem. And I still go back to your summary slide from on November 24th. We're saying that this is not, this is really an enrollment issue and not a parking issue. And I still keep coming back to that. And I think from this earlier speaker, you know, I have here the 10-day, you know, enrollment numbers for the pupil membership. And, you know, when I look at the breakdown of these numbers, there is definitely a bulge for kindergarten to third grade, and that the students are here, and we know that numbers have been going up. But when I look at these numbers, from the middle school and the high school numbers, they're lower than the DeJong-Healy projection. 6th grade, below by 23. 7th grade, 29 below. 8th grade, even. 9th grade, 3 below. 10th grade, 20 students below. 11th grade, 2. And 12th, 5. So I look at these, and we're not even at capacity. And up to 3rd grade, when we start to get a little over capacity, that's still many years away. And that is why I think there is some question, because even putting that bulge together, you're just getting, if you reallocate students or go to the CAC or whatever, using both high schools wisely and at capacity, you are then could save a lot of people a lot of money, and for you guys a lot of headaches. I don't think you would even need to renovate the DAO or place classrooms at Harriton. Maybe we would need a few temporary classrooms. We could prevent taxpayers from buying, using the changes at the buses and getting new buses if we look at the buses. So I just strongly recommend that you look at the crux of the problem, the heart of the matter, whatever it may be, and we really, really assess these enrollment numbers. And I know you're taking more time, and I ask for the additional time to see for the enrollment numbers, because I think a lot of us just still don't feel like these make sense. And I'm looking at these numbers, at least from the 2000 September, and I'm still not convinced. So thank you very much.
Thank you for the question. Nick, Dr. Marseille, do you have something?
Yeah, I encourage, and I apologize, I can't think of the presentation that showed specifically where the enrollment numbers were in previous previous slide decks. There's so many, but I do want to argue that we are seeing a high number of elementary students far exceeding the Dijon Healy. I will agree from memory that there are some dips at the middle school and high school experience, but when you look at our elementary, it's literally a vertical line in terms of that. Now, we can argue in terms of will those projections hold, right? Because we talked about the analysis, we talked about the research, about what that looks like the further you go out, and I'm willing to engage in that conversation. I think for me, the last 3 years, it continues to go up. I think it is an opportunity at the elementary level, and I think it is an opportunity for us to talk about that and see whether or not those enrollment patterns will continue. So we've heard that concern, and we're definitely listening to ensuring that we do our due diligence, not only with respect to our anticipated number of buses, but future growth, whatever that may look like, and another look at that.
Okay, Allison Graham, Gordon Henry, Kevin Murphy, and Brody Stevens.
Allison Graham, 124 Anton Road in Wynwood. Thank you for having us again. I did speak at the meeting on the 24th, and I would repeat that I was on the BAG group for Lower Merion High School, along with Dr. Slattery. And I would like to repeat that the best thing you can do, since you are hearing a lot of questions about whether the facts are straight, whether the numbers are going to go in one direction, or perhaps, as Dr. Slattery said, up and down, up and down, up and down. We lived through the last great upheaval in this district when the prediction was that we were going to drop students like crazy. We sold 4 schools. We ripped down Ardmore Junior High School, and lo and behold, the numbers changed. And we have all these students now. So when you try to predict more than 5 years out, be very careful. I would like to repeat what I suggested on the 24th, and that is, instead of doing anything expensive and permanent, and we talked about flexibility, right? Flexibility at Welsh Valley. What you could do right now in order to move the 24 buses that live outside this building is to put in some of Pat Ganane's wonderful pervious paving over there. I like that, Pat. And that would give you room to park at least the 24 buses that are here and possibly more, which is really your only immediate problem. Really your only immediate problem as outlined. To move those buses so that you can get to work on renovating this building. That would give you time to look over a couple more years at what is really happening with your enrollment figures. There are a lot of projections about things that are going to get built. I have done enough work with Lower Merion Township to know that I was on the Environmental Advisory Council for 8 years. We saw projects proposed, not built, proposed, not built. So to think that everything is going to appear is not the way life goes around here. We then had a recession, and that you know what happened with that. So when you try to look at numbers in the outer years, be very careful. And not like General Patton, but another famous quote is, "Those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it." Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Thank you very much.
Gordon Henry, Kevin Murphy, Brody Stevens.
Good evening. My name is Gordon Henry. I live at 209 Worcester Road in Ardmore. I did speak before you on the 24th, and I'm a member of the North Ardmore Civic Association Board of Directors. My main points to you are that I oppose the parking garage here at the high school. I implore you to share the burden, as has been stated, across the different neighborhoods, and to really negotiate and think hard, as a business person would, when you enter into these discussions about alternative properties. And I'll come back to that. I do want to reiterate some points that were made on the 24th. This community here in North Ardmore and Wynwood, we were told we were going to have equal schools of 1,250 approximately, and obviously today we don't. We were told when the DAO was built, you said, you know, we've got some empty space, can we put more kids in there? We've got a low-cost alternative. Was the cost of this parking deck figured in when you talked about putting in the DAO improvements here, right? That was almost free, but nobody was talking about what was going to happen with the parking. It seems like that was, oh, we forgot about that. We were promised over 24, a limit of 24 buses over and over. Now we're talking about more buses. And I'll tell you, we were told in July and August during those meetings we weren't going to have a parking deck, and now we're talking about a parking deck. So there is a feeling in this community that we have heard things that have not been fulfilled on, that there have been promises that have been broken. Now, I do feel that the burden sharing issue has just not been dealt with, because we have here obviously a high school, a congested property, buses and parking, as well as parking right in our neighborhood, which many of the neighbors can attest to, kids coming back and forth, moving their cars all day. You've raised many of these alternative locations before, and yet it doesn't feel to me like you've really negotiated those the way a business person would. I know you raised the Ball Avenue location. I know you had a lot of people show up at those meetings. That has now fallen off the face, and the reason I saw on Mr. Ganane's last slide from last meeting was zoning. Why would you have put up Ball Avenue as a viable alternative if there was not appropriate zoning? I think it was because you had people show up who screamed about it. The seminary, you talked about the seminary. Has that really been negotiated? I heard last meeting, well, whoever makes that decision doesn't want to offer it for buses. Well, has that really been negotiated? Have all the inroads and outroads and egresses and pricing been considered? Obviously, Harridan is brought up tonight. I have a kid at Harridan as well as at Lower Merion, and you know, there's more green space at Harridan than there is here. And I remember a few meetings ago there was talk of the food source lot. Whatever happened to the food source lot discussion? I know you're looking at a lot of properties, but I hear you say things like, well, the commissioner's approval is not forthcoming. We were told we were going to have only 24 buses here, and that was a limit and a cap and it couldn't be exceeded. Why is the commissioner's approval forthcoming for here, but not these other locations? This seems to be a default when you get turned down in other places. And I just don't think, given the congestion we have here and given all the burden we've taken on here, that it's fair to look at us as a dumping ground for more locations, more buses and more parking. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Roos?
Yeah, just to be clear about Bala Village, when the district first expressed an interest and pursued acquisition of Bala Village, it was zoned for commercial use and it was zoned for bus parking. It was only after the district disclosed that the commissioners then passed an ordinance prohibiting bus parking. So it was zoned, when the district first pursued it, it was zoned properly. It was only after they did that the zoning got changed.
Okay. Good evening. I am Kevin Murphy. I live in Marion, and I am president of the Federation of Civics of Lower Marion and Narberth. I was also one of the 45 members of the 2004 Community Advisory Committee and on the Building Advisory Group at Marion School. As we meet, it has come to our attention, as already stated, that many of the 10th day enrollment numbers do not sufficiently support action on a decision about where to park the school buses. Because of this, we at the Federation support any decision that delays the decision until such time as adequate information in a transparent manner has been shared with the community. On a side note, as a commercial real estate broker, I'd suggest purchasing an office building for administration of 21,000 square feet instead of considering leasing for $500,000 to $700,000 a year. It would pay for itself over time, and the need for space will not disappear. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Brody Stevens, Francie McComb, and Carol Strickland.
Hi, I'm Brody Stevens of Schoolhouse Lane. I appreciate all the time that the board is spending on meetings about buses. I spoke at the meeting on the 24th, and I guess I'd just like to briefly reiterate some of the same concerns that we had then and that a number of people have mentioned again tonight. The first being congestion. I do think it's certainly a safety issue. That is something that I'm glad to see that the board will consult with the police on. But I also think that it is also, a quality of life issue and not something that should be taken for granted. Certainly the police will have some good things to say, but no matter how much you can slow traffic down, it's the fact of the quantity of traffic that's a concern. With regard to the parking deck proposal at Lower Marion, I think some other potential hurdles for the school district could be light pollution and stormwater management. I do think that those are some serious concerns that the neighborhood will be watching to see what is proposed if you continue down that path. And then lastly, just on the projections, I'm not a statistician by any means, but the previous projections were wrong, as you've pointed out. What makes you so confident that the new projections couldn't also be wrong just as they were years ago? And I guess also in showing those charts where you have the lines on the graph, I would expect, I don't know for sure, but I would expect that there are margins of error, both on the projections from years ago and then margins of error on the projections now. And when you put them on a graph, it might be helpful to see that cone of uncertainty develop over time, and we could see if we really are within range. And then overall, I guess I would just reiterate that it certainly would be helpful to take as much time as you can to let the enrollment numbers develop and not rush the decision. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Marseille?
Can I say that I know there will probably be continued comments around the projection numbers and margin of error and the analysis of that, and I did present on several occasions with regards to the Dijon Healy report and the methodology, the range where we've been. So I think after hearing a couple, I'd like to recommend that I repeat parts of that presentation for the 15th, which I will do.
Please.
Sorry, could I just suggest that people email their questions in before that presentation so that we can address what people are concerned about in the projections?
We're
That's
taking
a good
notes, but yeah,
Okay.
sure. To community comments? Is that what you're suggesting?
I'd also like to point out again that at the recommendation of the previous superintendent, given that our internal numbers were showing such unexpected growth, that the previous superintendent recommended that we hire professional consultants, which was, as far as I understand, the first time that was done, so that the previous projections were not actually based on external consultants' numbers. And so that when the high schools were built, there hadn't been an external study. So we now have this external study, and as he said, you'll be able to Dr. Marseille has in fact given those numbers and the margin of error and all the rest of it, and I'm sure everybody will look forward to hearing that again on December 15th.
My name is Francie McComb, and I'm from Ballackinwood, and I am going to address the numbers. The school district has said repeatedly that numbers over 5 years out it can't rely on. But the thing that bothers me the most about the projections actually is that you show unlimited growth. And what those projections are actually based on are not just students that are here now, but are continued people joining in. And one of the things that happened, why the township commissioners actually came to the last school board meeting, is that they were concerned that it was actually based on information, and you guys admitted that some of your ideas about growth and where growth is coming from the township was wrong. So I think that here's the answer. I'm grateful that you're going over this again, but you need to get it right. It's very unlikely that you're going to have exponential growth in infinity. It just doesn't make any sense. And you're spending millions of dollars based on it. So I ask you to look at that again. The second, somebody else raised this. I don't know why you can't look at Welch Valley. You say you have no short-term plan on it. You have some long-term plan, maybe a kindergarten center. But right now you don't have a plan. And you have an immediate need, you say. So I think you need to look at it. I think you need to look at it, the impervious space, whatever. The third thing is about waiving student parking. I have no skin in the game. My boys will be graduated by the time this all happens, and they don't drive. But, I heard a township commissioner meeting some years ago where the head of the Haverford School was called on the carpet because students were parking illegally around the Haverford School. And basically what he said is he can't control the students. The students who can drive will. And I think you guys owe it to the neighbors as a good neighbor, and I don't live in this neighborhood, to be honest about what will happen if you waive student parking. You need to be really honest about that. The people in Ardmore and Wynwood deserve that. And my last point is, I'm going to ask you guys to be really clear. We saw in Ballackinwood you guys make an offer in which you reserved eminent domain against properties that were not for sale. That's what happened. There was pending zoning, and it got passed. But the fact is, it wasn't for sale. And Doug Young had the pleasure of listening to one of the property owners screaming his head off about the fact that it wasn't for sale. The next up is St. Charles. It comes out in the Mainline Times, we're considering St. Charles. Well, St. Charles wasn't going to sell to you either. They're selling to developers. And now we're going through it again with Writer's Ferry. If it's not for sale, there's already been millions of dollars of litigation so that that developer can develop it. He's got plans. And to your credit, you show it. So take it off the list. Stop going after properties that aren't for sale and go for realistic things and be honest to the community and honest to the neighbors about what's going to happen with whatever you do. We do deserve that. And some of us, at least, remember what you say. So if it's not for sale, take it off the list. Because it's already spent, they've already spent, I don't know, $1 million in litigation. They're not just going to hand you the property. And if you're going to seize it, then tell us that. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Carol Strickland and Charles Scott.
Good evening, Carol Strickland, Wynwood. There is one option that was discussed on the 24th of November, which seems to have dropped off the radar screen tonight. And I'd like to know if there was a reason for it, and that is the parking of up to 11 buses at St. Justin's, which, to the best of my knowledge, would be close to free for the taxpayers in this township if need be. So if someone could either address that or add it back to the option list, it would be very much appreciated. This school board really needs to be fiscally prudent. While the other municipalities, Montgomery County and Lower Merion Township, have had either flat taxes or minimal tax increases over the last number of years, this school board, for a variety of reasons, some of which may be out of their control, have had what many of us consider extraordinary tax increases. And you are really pinching your residents. So if you would please keep fiscal prudence in mind while you are searching for your options, we would very much appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Okay, our last two speakers are Charles Scott and Jim Greenfield. Oh, sorry. You'll go before Mr.
If there are any
Greenfield.
additional speakers, would you please sign up with Ms. LaPera at this time? We're going to close the list.
Good evening. My name is Charles Scott, and I'm the president of the Penguin Civic Association. And really, the most important reason that I wanted to get up and speak tonight was to congratulate Penguin resident Dr. Robin Van Lynch on her election to the presidency of the school board. But since I've been sitting through this meeting, one of the things that has concerned me a little bit has been the willingness of some neighbors to push the burden of this problem onto other neighbors rather than looking at the roots of this problem and trying to solve the roots of the problem, which are that there's too many vehicles on too little space. And so one of the things that we heard from somebody, I can't remember who, to encourage you to think creatively about this problem. When I think about where I work, which is a landlocked Center City campus, one of the things that we would never consider doing is giving away valuable property for cars. And so we, those of my colleagues who drive to work have to pay for that privilege. And that creates an incentive for others of us to find alternative ways to get to campus so that we don't have to pay for parking. And so one of the things that you might think about doing is charging for parking. Obviously within your contractual relationship with your staff, you can't do that without giving them that money back in salary, but that would essentially create an incentive for people to explore alternatives. Because now if somebody wanted to take the regional rail and then walk from nearby Ardmore Regional Rail Station to the Lower Merion campus, that would cost them about $130 a month in a regional rail pass. And they're not compensated for that. Whereas who would make that choice when they can park here for free? Right? Now, obviously, there's going to have to be some offsets and you're going to need to work more creatively and collaboratively with our township commissioners because they're going to have to change the zoning that underlies this property so that you don't have to have so many spaces for so many categories of people who are using this campus. I mean, I certainly encourage you to do that. That's going to be important no matter what happens going forward. But we would love for you to find a way to work more cooperatively with the Board of Commissioners on common interests like reducing our traffic, reducing our dependence on cars and creating congestion for all of our neighborhoods. If you were to restrict parking to staff even, let alone students, obviously you would have problems with overflow into neighborhoods that would have to be solved by the township issuing residents stickers for their cars so that then we could tow anybody out of there and then we would no longer have a problem with students parking in our neighborhoods. And so by having a more mutual relationship with our commissioners, I think that's how we can begin to solve these problems in a more cooperative fashion and in a way that's actually going to reduce the root of the problem, which is that there are too many vehicles and not enough space for mission-critical vehicles like our buses. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Scott. Dr. Marseille.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Scott. I have to say that you may be happy with this statement. Since we've had this conversation around sustainability, and we know that this is the lead school, and we're thinking differently around those particular issues. And since you brought that up, since then we knew that this was a multifaceted conversation. And we are partnering up with GVF, a Transportation Management Association, to really help us do an analysis on commuter patterns and commuting. We wanted them to do an analysis on sidewalk analysis in terms of who's walking, how they're walking, whether or not there are places to do that. And then most importantly is the educational aspect, creating a community-wide based network where we help to educate not only our community members, our students, our faculty, in terms of finding alternative ways of transportation. So in addition to the other things that we are doing, when we raised that at one of our policy meetings, I remember, we've been actively engaging and thinking of way of, once we address some of these issues, I really think you can address this issue without talking about sustainability, without educating the public around alternative ways of transportation, incentivizing those. And GVF has come on board and they're willing to help the district, and they've worked with the township as well to work with us. So we're excited that, and I'll be presenting more of the details to the board at a policy meeting, but we're just really excited that we've been having this conversation, and they're going to help us look at understanding our commuting patterns and understanding the alternative ways in which we can incentivize transportation.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Susan Guthrie, Rosa Sirota, and Jim Greenfield.
Good evening, Susan Guthrie. I live in Marion Station. So I just want to follow up on the enrollment figures in that discussion. I asked a question on the 24th about an announcement that the Montgomery County Planning Commission, I guess, was going to, I believe about a month ago, the board had agreed to engage a demographer to do a study as a follow-up. And I asked on the 24th when that study, when it was anticipated that that study would be released, and I don't believe that answer's been provided yet, so I'm asking again. I also want to say that I think that some of the discussion around the numbers and what the numbers look like in the out year might originate from some of the work that I've done with the demographer's numbers, some of the analysis that I've looked at. And so basically, I just want to say that I'm happy to sit down with anybody. I've done quite a bit of poking around the numbers, trying to understand where the demographer's getting her projections, not just the methodology, but fundamentally her projections relative to historical growth, and whether it's high numbers coming in or whether it's growth from year to year to year. And I have to say that some of the things that I'm finding in the existing data just do not make sense in comparison to her projections. And so I would encourage anybody who wants to give me a call. I'm happy to show you what I know. I also don't think that there was any, well, I'll just say for myself, I don't recall seeing any announcements about this meeting since the 24th. I have 2 kids, one's in high school, one's in middle school. I don't believe that there was an announcement, at least at the middle school, with regards to this meeting. So if you could please just publicize the next meeting, I would appreciate that. And also, the last note or comment that I wanted to make has to do with ensuring that those attending the Lower Merion schools are actually residents. I know historically, and I suspect currently, that there's efforts to make sure that people aren't unlawfully enrolled in the school if they're not actually a resident. And I recall that there are other school districts where, when they have detected people who are attending who aren't supposed to be attending, once they've expelled them, they've also charged them back tuition. Might be something to consider, since it would send a very strong signal that we will not tolerate people who are not in the district. I don't know how many people that is, but if numbers are tight, every little bit would help. So I would encourage you to think about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Marseille?
And our last 2 speakers are Rosa Sirota and Jim Greenfield.
Thank you, Dr. Guthrie, and thank you for your willingness to support the district and tapping into your understanding of the methodology. I have to say that we did engage with a demographer, but that study is not released yet because that hasn't taken place. But as soon as that happens, we will do that. And I have heard from several residents with issue on making sure that we're being very diligent with regards to who lives in this community. And we always have been and continue to be vigilant in terms of that. I know it is a process to ensure that we've gathered enough information to present that in a format that is credible, in terms of making sure that if indeed you're living, you're going to this district, you're going to this school or these schools, that you actually live here. So it's one of many things that we continue to take a look at.
Good evening, Rosa Sirota, Wynwood. Dr. Marseille, I think if you shared with us what your process is and what steps you go through, and not just this evening, but at another time, that would help us understand. And also, this is a very enlightened community, as I'm sure we all know. And as Jerry Francis mentioned when he talked about, I think about when you were considering redistricting, the redistricting or opening up the choice zone, the walk zone. he suggested that you do something like the CAC and model what you did with the CAC and have neighbors. Well, you've seen tonight what kind of neighbors, what kind of residents you have in Lower Merion. That could have been a great opportunity, and I would like you all, when another opportunity presents itself, to think about that. Plus the fact, wouldn't you rather we fight with each other than you? Really. But on the CAC, that didn't even happen. There wasn't any fighting. It was all very reasonable, really. And where we disagreed in a very respectful way. Okay, getting to my points, which I don't have much time for. As many folks already said, the reliability of predictions diminish over time. So my question is, why are predicting, 6, 7 years from now? Why don't you do what you need to do for the next 3 years? You have reserve space at several sites. Why don't you use them? All you have to do is put up a fence. That's all. You're thinking of putting fences around elementary schools. I don't understand the purpose for that one. You have more of a problem with high school kids getting out. And really, so I don't get that. But let's not spend that money. Let's put a fence in the reasonable places, because in that way, we don't take those places permanently, but we use them while we still need them. Also, the John Healy report, I guess around 2 years ago, when you factored that with the students coming in from Narberth and South Ardmore, those numbers not correct. And over again, a community member said they are not correct. And when she sent her work product with you, you changed those numbers on your site, which was admirable of you to do that. But the numbers at Penn Wynne were not correct by Jishang Healy. So I think you need to listen to what people say and get the numbers right before you spend any money at all. Because that's our tax money. We want to spend it on the students. We want to spend it on education. We don't want to spend it on bricks and mortar. Thank you.
Thank you. Is that the final question, or is it? Okay, Ms. Greenfield.
Jim Greenfield, appearing on behalf of both the Wynwood and North Ardmore Civic Associations, and thanks again for allowing me the opportunity to speak tonight. Over many years working with local governments in this area, it's become quite apparent to me that school boards have the most difficult job in local government, especially here in Lower Merion, where you're handed a gem of a school district and you're told to continue to make it better. We appreciate the difficulty of the task that you have, particularly on this issue, and we very much appreciate your extension of the information gathering and deliberative processes as you try to work through the alternative sites that you have before you. And we look forward to continuing to work with you, and we also look forward to any new information you can uncover that will bring some light to this task. Thanks again.
Thank you, Mr. Greenfield. And for our speakers, we have a meeting next week, our regular board business meeting, where we'll continue the discussion regarding enrollment growth and bus parking, Monday, December 15th at 8 p.m. in this room. And with that, we are adjourned.